Getting rich can destroy your life faster than being broke if you do this wrong. When money arrives suddenly, the most immediate and dangerous change is not in your bank balance, but in how the world begins to look at you. Wealth acts like a spotlight, and once it turns on, it attracts attention from every direction. People who never noticed you before suddenly see opportunity, obligation, or advantage in your existence. This attention is rarely neutral. It carries expectations, assumptions, and demands that you did not consent to but are now forced to navigate. The moment others know you have money, your financial life stops being private and starts becoming public property in their minds. What makes sudden wealth especially dangerous is that it removes the natural learning curve most people go through when building money slowly. When wealth is earned over time, boundaries are formed organically. People learn who to trust, how to say no, and how to protect themselves gradually. Sudden money skips that process entirely. One day you are invisible. The next day you are a solution to other people's problems. Friends begin to share ideas that sound suspiciously like business proposals. Family members frame their requests as emotional obligations. Strangers appear with urgency, stories, and causes that somehow require your involvement. The money becomes a magnet, and you become the target it's attached to. Once the target is visible, pressure becomes constant. Every interaction starts to carry an unspoken question. What can you do for me now that you have this? Even when nothing is said out loud, you feel it in conversations, in tone, in expectations. You may begin to second-guess your own choices, wondering whether spending on yourself is selfish when others know you could help. This internal conflict drains clarity and replaces it with guilt, making it easier for others to influence decisions that are not in your best interest. The danger is not just external threats, but the erosion of your confidence in your right to choose freely. Public knowledge of wealth also increases risk in very real, tangible ways. Legal exposure grows. Opportunistic lawsuits become more likely. Conflicts escalate faster because people assume you can afford consequences. Even small disputes can turn into expensive problems when the other party believes there is money to be extracted. At the same time, personal safety becomes a concern. The more visible the wealth, the more predictable your life appears. And predictability makes exploitation easier. Privacy, once lost, cannot be bought back easily. There is also a psychological shift that occurs when you become known as the one with money. Your identity starts to blur. Achievements, personality, and values are slowly overshadowed by your financial status. You are no longer just you. You are your net worth in the eyes of others. This can be isolating, because genuine connection becomes harder to distinguish from interest-driven interaction. Trust turns into a constant calculation, and relationships lose their simplicity. In this environment, the money itself stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling like responsibility under surveillance. Every move is watched, judged, or interpreted. The wealth that was supposed to expand your life instead begins to restrict it. This is why sudden money is so dangerous when it becomes public knowledge. Not because money is evil, but because attention changes behavior, both yours and everyone else's, and once that shift happens, the cost of being seen can be far greater than the value of what you gained. Sudden money does not change who a person is at their core. It removes the limits that were keeping certain behaviors contained. When resources are scarce, habits are naturally restricted by necessity. Impulses may exist, but they cannot always be acted on. When money appears all at once, those restraints disappear, and whatever patterns already exist are given room to expand. This is why wealth feels like transformation from the outside, but functions more like amplification from the inside. People often believe that money will solve emotional instability, insecurity, or lack of direction. In reality, it removes the consequences that once forced self-correction. A person who avoided responsibility before wealth can now delay it indefinitely. Someone who relied on distraction can afford better distractions. Someone prone to excess can now indulge without immediate resistance. The money does not create these tendencies. It accelerates them. Without the friction of limitation, behavior runs at full speed, and flaws become more visible, not less. Discipline becomes the dividing line between sustainability and collapse. When income arrives slowly, Discipline is trained over time through repetition and consequence. Sudden wealth bypasses that training. Decisions are no longer filtered through necessity, but through desire. Purchases feel justified because the money exists, not because they align with long-term stability. Over time, this creates a pattern where short-term gratification replaces intentional direction, and the absence of immediate pain hides the damage being done. Addiction illustrates this magnification clearly. Money does not protect against it. It finances it. Access expands, frequency increases, and accountability disappears. The environment adjusts to support the behavior rather than challenge it. New social circles form that normalize excess and reward indulgence. The individual may feel more powerful, but that power is often borrowed from future stability. When the behavior finally catches up, the fall is steeper because the stakes are higher and the losses are larger. Relationships are also affected by this amplification. Pre-existing dynamics intensify. If boundaries were weak before, they become nearly non-existent. If validation was sought externally, attention becomes the new currency. Wealth draws people in, and without a strong internal compass, it becomes difficult to distinguish support from encouragement of self-destructive choices. The desire to feel accepted or admired can quietly guide decisions that look confident on the surface but are rooted in insecurity. Decision-making under sudden wealth often shifts from values to identity. People begin to act based on who they think they are supposed to be now rather than who they actually are. Spending becomes symbolic, not practical. Choices are made to reinforce a narrative of success rather than to build a stable foundation. Over time, this creates a disconnect between reality and self-perception. The lifestyle grows, but the skills required to sustain it do not. What ultimately determines whether sudden wealth becomes a tool or a trap is not intelligence or luck, but self-awareness. Money exposes the systems a person uses to regulate themselves. If those systems are weak, wealth will highlight that weakness quickly. If they are strong, wealth becomes leverage instead of liability. The danger lies in assuming that money itself will do the work of growth. It never does. It only reveals, with brutal clarity, what was already there waiting for room to expand. Lifestyle inflation rarely announces itself as a problem. It enters quietly, disguised as progress, reward, and self-respect. When money increases suddenly, there is a natural urge to align the external world with the new internal identity. The house should look better. The car should feel newer. The surroundings should reflect success. These changes feel logical, even deserved, because they are framed as upgrades rather than commitments. What often goes unnoticed is that every upgrade carries a permanent cost that does not disappear when excitement fades. The danger lies in confusing access with affordability. Having enough money to buy something once is not the same as having enough money to sustain it indefinitely. Ownership introduces ongoing expenses that compound over time. Taxes, maintenance, insurance, repairs, staffing, and expectations all become recurring drains. At first, these costs seem manageable because the initial purchase overshadows them. Over time, they become the structure of daily life, quietly consuming resources long after the emotional reward is gone. Lifestyle inflation also reshapes expectations. Once a higher standard becomes normal, returning to a simpler version feels like loss rather than choice. Comfort quickly turns into necessity. What once felt luxurious becomes baseline, and anything below it feels unacceptable. This psychological shift is subtle but powerful. It traps people in a cycle where income must continually rise just to maintain the same sense of stability. The money no longer creates freedom. It creates dependency on its own continuation. Social pressure reinforces this cycle. Environments change as lifestyle changes. New neighborhoods, new social circles, and new norms redefine what is considered acceptable. Spending that would have once felt excessive now feels average, even modest. Comparison replaces intention. Decisions are influenced less by personal values and more by unspoken competition. This makes restraint feel isolating, as if choosing less means falling behind rather than staying in control. The illusion of security created by visible wealth is especially dangerous. Expensive assets create the appearance of success while reducing actual flexibility. Money tied up in depreciating or high-maintenance items cannot be easily redirected when circumstances change. Cash flow becomes fragile, and small disruptions begin to feel threatening. The lifestyle demands consistency, but life rarely provides it. When income fluctuates or unexpected costs appear, the margin for error is already gone. Over time, lifestyle inflation shifts focus away from ownership and toward obligation. What was meant to enhance life starts to dictate it. Decisions become constrained by the need to support the structure that has been built. Time, energy, and attention are redirected toward maintenance rather than growth. The individual becomes a manager of expenses instead of a builder of freedom. This is why lifestyle inflation is so effective at draining wealth. It does not feel reckless. It feels responsible, earned, and aligned with success. Yet beneath that surface, it replaces flexibility with fixed costs and turns money into a requirement rather than a resource. The more polished the life appears, the more fragile it often becomes. Wealth disappears not in one dramatic collapse, but in the quiet, daily commitment to a standard that keeps demanding more long after it has stopped giving anything back. Guilt has a powerful influence on how people behave once money enters their life suddenly. It often shows up disguised as responsibility, loyalty, or gratitude, making it difficult to recognize as a threat. When someone becomes wealthy, especially if those around them are not, an unspoken imbalance forms. The person with money becomes aware of differences they did not cause but are now expected to address. This awareness creates emotional pressure, and guilt quietly becomes the driver behind many financial decisions. What makes guilt-based generosity so destructive is that it ignores structure and replaces it with reaction. Money is given in response to stories, urgency, or emotional discomfort rather than long-term thinking. Each act of help feels justified in isolation, but together they form a pattern that erodes stability. Instead of solving problems, the money often delays them. Challenges that might have been temporary or instructive become permanent because external support removes the need for adaptation. Over time, the giver becomes entangled in problems that are not theirs to carry. As this pattern continues, expectations begin to form. What started as help slowly becomes assumed. Requests become more frequent and less apologetic. Boundaries blur until saying no feels like betrayal. The person with money is no longer seen as generous, but as available. This shift creates resentment on both sides. The giver feels used and drained, while the receiver feels entitled and disappointed when support is withheld. Relationships strain under the weight of unspoken contracts that were never clearly defined. There is also a psychological cost to being positioned as the solution to other people's lives. Responsibility expands beyond reason. Financial setbacks no longer affect just one person, but an entire network that has grown dependent on support. This pressure creates constant anxiety, as every decision carries emotional consequences. The wealth that was supposed to provide security instead becomes a source of ongoing stress. Tied to the fear of letting others down, the damage extends beyond relationships into identity. When generosity becomes a coping mechanism for guilt, self-worth becomes entangled with financial output. Value is measured by how much is given rather than who the person is. This creates a fragile sense of purpose that requires continuous spending to maintain. The moment the flow of money slows or stops, the identity built around being the provider collapses, often leaving behind confusion and isolation. Financially, guilt-driven giving undermines sustainability. Resources that could have been used to create stability, growth, or long-term security are dispersed without replenishment. The money leaves faster than it can regenerate. And because it was given emotionally rather than strategically, there is little return beyond temporary relief. Over time, the gap between income and obligation widens until even significant wealth begins to feel insufficient. This is why guilt-based generosity is so dangerous. It feels moral, compassionate, and human. Yet it quietly shifts responsibility for other people's lives onto one person's balance sheet. Instead of strengthening relationships, it distorts them. Instead of creating freedom, it builds invisible chains. Wealth lasts when it is aligned with clarity and intention. But when guilt becomes the guiding force, Money stops being a tool and starts becoming a burden that grows heavier with every act meant to ease it. Sudden wealth has a way of distorting how connection is perceived. Attention increases rapidly, and with it comes a powerful emotional response. Being noticed, admired, or pursued can feel validating, especially if those experiences were limited before money entered the picture. The danger lies in how easily attention can be mistaken for genuine care. Wealth amplifies visibility, and visibility attracts interest, but interest does not automatically equal loyalty, respect, or love. When money becomes part of the social equation, motivations become harder to read. Interactions that appear warm and enthusiastic may be fueled by access rather than affection. People adjust their behavior when they believe proximity has benefits. Compliments increase, availability expands, and agreement becomes effortless. This can create a false sense of closeness that feels real because it is consistent. Yet it is conditional. The connection exists as long as the benefits remain. Over time, this dynamic subtly reshapes relationships. The person with money may begin to take on the role of provider, sponsor, or rescuer without consciously choosing it. Invitations, plans, and experiences start to revolve around what can be funded rather than shared. The relationship becomes transactional, even if neither party openly acknowledges it. When financial contribution becomes expected, emotional reciprocity often fades. What remains is presence tied to privilege rather than mutual investment. The emotional cost of this confusion is significant. Trust becomes fragile because it is unclear whether people value the individual or the lifestyle surrounding them. Doubt creeps into moments that should feel genuine. Acts of kindness may be questioned. Compliments may feel rehearsed. This constant internal skepticism erodes intimacy and replaces connection with analysis. Even real relationships can suffer because the environment encourages suspicion. This confusion also affects romantic dynamics. Attraction influenced by wealth can feel intense but unstable. Generosity may be interpreted as love, and spending may replace emotional depth. When conflict arises or boundaries are tested, the foundation reveals itself. If money is the glue holding the relationship together, removing it causes immediate strain. What looked like devotion often proves to be dependence, and what felt like partnership reveals itself as convenience. Over time, attention-driven relationships create emotional exhaustion. Maintaining them requires continuous output, whether financial, social, or experiential. The person with wealth may feel pressure to entertain, provide, or impress in order to keep others engaged. This creates a cycle where self-worth becomes linked to performance rather than authenticity. The moment the performance stops, the attention fades, reinforcing the belief that value is conditional. The most damaging aspect of confusing attention with love is how it delays real connection. Energy is invested in people who are present for the perks, leaving little room for those who would remain without them. Genuine relationships often form quietly and slowly, without spectacle or reward. When attention dominates, these subtle bonds are easy to overlook. Wealth does not attract love. It attracts opportunity. Love emerges when opportunity is irrelevant. When money enters the picture, it becomes essential to understand that not all presence is meaningful and not all admiration is earned. True connection is revealed not by who stays when resources are abundant, but by who remains when the advantages disappear and only the person is left to engage. If this opened your eyes, watch my next video right here before money teaches you this lesson the hard way.